My name is Emanuel Kelly. I've been living here at 4513 Regent, near Clark Park, for about 45 years. Diane and I got married in '78. She was still living at her mother's house. And in '78, my favorite blocks were St. Mark's Square, Beaumont Street, maybe one other, and this street, because there's an intimacy of them. The architecture was wonderful, and the size was suffice for a family. And this, the one on St. Mark's Place, I couldn't afford. The mother had died, the son had took over the property, needed a lot of work, and I think back then they wanted $180,000. I didn't have it. Somewhat less on Beaumont, but this house was 3 apartments. Everything was students, like not quite like you see in the 4200 block of Pine. Do you remember when those were all painted brown and had 4 or 5 to 6 apartments in it? It's the school that made the difference, the deconversion. Right, well, school-wise, I mean, this block was in and out of the proposed district, but we had Ian was in, well, my older son was in Parkway House. Ian was in Friends Select, and so it didn't matter where the line went. This property was $23,000. Each floor was an apartment. There was a kitchen where it was there, but pipes you see running up. Each floor had its kitchen in the middle, and so on. And Philippine mahogany. Do you remember those? Maybe you're too young to remember those. The brown Philippine, it was mahogany, brown panels. I didn't know, anyway. And drop ceilings. So the mortgage price was $23,000. I could see the potential. I asked for $5,000, so it was $29,000 to buy materials. I mean, all I had was $5,000, right? So for materials, so I never taught in the summer because that was the time to spend full time in the office, and then it turned out to be full time working on this house from the end of March to the end of August. I and George Schwab worked on all the carpentry work, and we luckily had Peter Goldberg. His father had been an electrician and a plumber. He was in second year. He did all the plumbing work, right, and electrical work, most of it, until it came to the fine stuff. And so the other attraction for me was that this block still, at that time, was half white professionals and mainly working class blacks, and Mo was here before we came on, Kathy, so they were professionals, and the corner house on the other side were professionals. But being mixed, that was more attractive to me personally, and there was, you know, a school teacher that retired and so on. But most of the black families did hard work still. The man in the house, or the women did domestic work, like my mother did 50 years ago, right? I mean, that's all they had known from the way the few opportunities that existed for them, right? So now these houses, we gained the space when Mark moved out, and then the second floor front, which used to be Ian's room, moved up to the third floor front. And so now the second floor front is Diane's study, the middle room is her walk-in. Right. And the back is the bedroom. Third floor back was always my study. I wanted it looking out into the trees. That's one of the benefits. Even if, you know, these are smaller houses than the Chester Avenue house, but they have similar features and materials. But the ability you gain, I mean, we have, what do we have, a 10-foot rear yard? But they have 50-foot rear yard. You gain from the space. I mean, so I'm on the third floor. I'm looking out in the trees. And they're mainly over in their yards, up and down, and rooftops, and so on, which is just wonderful. And the middle room, which is going to be my extended book room and TV room, used to be our TV room for years. And so space is amazing. I mean, this 11-foot ceilings, windows on both sides, light coming in, and all of the wood at that time was chestnut. I mean, all of the framing around everything was chestnut. The later floors were oak. But I gained understanding that chestnut was prevalent back in those days. And so I decided down here, all I do would just scrape the window frames with dental tools. I mean, it's like, hey, you see that banister? All that is chestnut, but I'm not doing just the no posts to give some sense of, it's like, whew. So I did that. I had my son do it, the older son, Mark, and we rebuilt, George and I rebuilt the porch roof. When I bought the house, the porch roof had both collapsed. That's probably another reason why it's only $23,000. I'm going to say Mrs. Smith. She did domestic work. She was African American, black. Had several kids. I mean, they were grown-ups that were still living with her. But I said to her, I will say Mrs. Smith, I said, if you pay for the material, I will rebuild your porch along with mine, because they're joined and connected. You can't not. So George and I rebuilt both porches. Talking about, what was that I was saying about talking about your children? Do you have a favorite? Not a favorite. I have a number of projects I'm very proud of. In historic preservation is Regent Terrace. The other thing I'm really proud about Regent Terrace. A lot of times when you're an architect, you design something, you walk away, you don't know whether people are going to take care of it, particularly if it's public, not private. I mean, not private like a house or something. And I feel very proud that Penrose also manages its properties. And so I used to every 6 months drive by that block. And then it turned out to be everything is still wonderful. It's because, you know, they have rules. And they don't admit people that won't take care of the property, So it feels good. Yeah. So that project really set us out in historic preservation. Being involved in the restoration of the exterior of City Hall, which went for 10 years, Vince and Maiello really led that. We developed some good people in that area, and to see it finished, the exterior, I mean, we worked with a whole team of architects and consultants. Actually, when the project started, Vitetta High Myers was the lead for the team. Mariana Thomas was doing the cast iron all up the roof there. Gosh, of course, Keystone Hood was the engineers. Carl Baumert. And we were doing all the window replacement and the roofs. Halfway through the project, the city public property asked us to take over the project management, but that it was downsizing and so on. Anyway, so the last 5 years we work on that project, and it feels very good, very, very good. You know, important project in the city and in the redevelopment of the city center and Avenue of the Arts and the Reading Terminal and the Convention Center. Convention Center allowed us to grow. Actually, while we consider ourselves good architects about making buildings and also about the technical aspects, but the design of spaces and all that, TVS&A from Atlanta was the prime, and they know about convention centers and the buildings of that scale and so on. So we came on to learn in schematics about the first construction, the first phase. The new building was from 11th Street to 13th Street, bridging 12th. But also there was two other aspects of that project. It was the shed, which got converted into the large meeting spaces, conventions, and so on, and the Reading Terminal Market. We got to be the prime, and this was Vincent's project too. We got to be the prime in the Reading Terminal Market, dealing with the 70 merchants, right, 70 merchants and so on, and upgrading health-wise all of their facilities, so on, as well as adding new infrastructure into the building. And what paid for that work was the fact that the foundations for the convention center were below that. And so that structure needed to be rebuilt in the basement below. And so the money to do the improvements of the Reading Terminal were part of that. All that was public money. So it's pluses that you gain. So the convention center, the new buildings on the north side of Market Street, phase one, by the time it got to design development, we understood why the organization was the way it was. I led that project. It was like 3 projects going on at once. It was the convention center proper with the bridge, the shed, and Reading Terminal Market. And we got to do Reading Terminal Market because we were here in Philadelphia and there was 70 miles as the prime. And so we never worked on anything that large as the convention center before. I had gone on this trip, this travel tour that a colleague of mine from Temple had set up. And it started in Paris with students and went on into Amsterdam and then Berlin and Russia. I just went along, such a fantastic trip. But in Paris, I got to walk the Louvre and see the scale of that, and so I could begin to think about the convention center. I mean, along the street wall, I mean, because the Louvre went on for blocks. It's like the scale of the windows, how you give scale to something that big. So that helped me a lot in comparing with how TVS had started thinking about the scale of things on Arch Street. And so I understood it. And so we had to implement it. So the selection of materials, but still working with them. And in construction documents, we did all of the detailing for all of that and the bridge. It was wonderful. And so that was going on. Something else that I'm very proud of, I mean, I think I'm proud of all the projects that we've done and we've been fortunate to do. Family court started. We were able to, at that time, the head judge, we were able to restore all the courtrooms and the waiting areas, which are Art Deco, WPA period, the fresco, the murals and everything. We were able to restore that. Actually, Mary Denade worked with us on that, getting the right consultants, contractors that do that kind of work. And actually, it was John Gowrie that got the interior of the ground floor and those public spaces to be on the city register. I think other than the main Courtyard in Wanamaker, that's the first building. So proud of that. Proud of all our schoolwork. But I must say, we were selected to do the new West Philadelphia High School. And since I went there, I'm proud of that. The South Philly, Girard Estates, we were selected by PHA, and this is my urban design experience, planning experience, to do the remake of, which became the remake of Tasker to Grace Ferry Homes or Grace Ferry Development. Tasker Homes was, I don't know why that happened. Originally when it was built, it was all on a diagonal to all the streets that go through. So in the beginning, when that was built, like some of the other large public housing, it was, you know, it was war area housing too. It was mixed. You know, people that worked at the depot, what is it, you know, 19th and Johnson, lived there. People that worked at the Navy Yard lived there, you know, white and black, right? And it became this isolated place, and partly because of the way it was off the grid, but also then all the youth became problems, drugs and violence and all that. So we came in, and one of the things in planning, we said the streets ought to go through and all of it needed to be rebuilt anyway, because that was all on ash. Nobody knew it. Anyway, and I must say, the new head of PHA, Philadelphia Housing Authority, and the tenant leadership saw it as an opportunity to get all those people that don't want to take care of anything, that were drug addicts and so on, get them out. That there would be standards for people wanting to apply. And it turned out there that there were a number of people that could afford home ownership. You wouldn't know it. So this is where Girard Estate comes in. One of the things I learned in housing is, and particularly low income, or what became affordable. Affordable is expanded to cover not just low income, the term, is that if you're poor, your desire is to be like other people that are successful, you know, mainly if you're middle income and have families on, you know, you'd like to have your house look like those people, not something that stands out. And so I learned a lot about that. So I said, let me go over to Girard Estates. A long while ago, one of our architects and his partner lived there. And when I got into the historic preservation involvement, you know, I was much aware of it. Its time and the style of the housing, whether they were twins or row houses, tree-lined streets, and so on. Hey, doesn't everybody want to live like that? Right. So I visited there. I said, we could, you know, some twins like this, 3 stories, sloped roofs, give it scale, maybe a little bit of a front yard, a porch, a front yard. But along the edge, I can't remember, that's the south edge, where there are row houses across the street that are privately owned. They should look like that. You know, people want things, right? And, you know, those who are working class and middle income people working hard, they take care of their property. So it was a combination of twins, new streets, tree-lined, and so on, and with rear parking alley, which could be, which was for parking, and in some cases a little yard, and so it's, you know, realizing what is successful and works, and that's what got built, and thank goodness. And now, once, you know, different phases are a little different, but that's what got built. I used to go by there once a year. And I go by there about every 18 months, something down that way. And I mean, last summer I went by this spring. You know, there's some of the lawns that, and that there were seniors housing. Essentially, in the beginning, there was the seniors housing was the center of the site, with a median boulevard and so on. Because the head of 10 housing says, you know, they represent what's good in us, and they're a model for others, right? Well, so it's on a, you know, major street is tree lined and so on. But at the edges, you know, I drive up and down the street, the trees that blossom, and I'm seeing individuals out there mowing their lawn, right? And there were 583 units, and half of those received support for home ownership, along with the people that liked living there and could afford to own their own home. They were part of the ones that bought with some assistance in the house. So to me, that's like, you know, the giving back where you were really listened to and appreciated. And you need administrators that buy into that. So is that at the scale of, boy, really impacted on a neighborhood, positive impact, right? And so those are some, and obviously the president's house, to be selected for that was amazing. And it was a real learning lesson. I mean, because there was nothing there. But archaeologically found out that there was still the foundations underground that were there. So we had an archaeologist on our team, Rebecca Yeaman. We had an American historian, very prominent. I learned a lot from him. Richard Rosenthal. We believe very much in sort of public, the importance of public exhibitions and so on. And I went to see his work when we were thinking about it. There was a major exhibit of the New York Historic Society called When Cotton Was King. And he was a major person for the organization of that. I learned a lot, and I knew somebody that knew him and said, gee, you think he might be interested in this project? It's like, how do you organize a direction for that, and what do you emphasize? Of course, the brief said everything in the world. So he, along with Mark Yulin, and us as a major participant, we sat down and he really developed the concept. Collectively, we said, well, the house was here. Let's not do a miniature of the house. Let's just do the floor plan of the house at the size of a house. And you walk into the vestibule. Average person can visualize that from their own house. And then you walk into a living room, a dining room, which may have been used for other things. The state became the state house, state dining room, and the kitchen and all those things. So we just laid that plan at full scale in the site. And then it's the telling of the stories of those that lived in the house. That came about because of Bob Brady in the U.S. House and Shaka Fatah at that time, is that they got passed a law for some funding that emphasized those that lived in the house. That was actually the most difficult job. The architecture was easy. And we were able to get Louis Messiah, who headed Scribe Video, and CARY. She had just written a book on the price of a child, which really talked about a mother and her child that through the Underground Railroad made it to Philadelphia. And at the time, slave catchers were looking for, even though they had enacted a law that said if you were in Pennsylvania for 6 months, you were free. And so if you made it over the border and so on, and so here's this woman with her child, and she met the head of the Underground Railroad, the leadership of which William Still is involved and so on, and that whole story. And she indicated in her stories where they were living temporarily in that whole area. And so that tuned me in. I was asked by the library to give a walking tour of that before this project came up. So I became familiar with where people lived. I became familiar with where free Africans lived, starting around Lombard South, and some of the smaller streets, even up on Spruce Street later, and so on. So I could visualize all of those, and of course where the Seventh Ward was later, and so on. So I knew a little bit about the history of the area, And so when we were talking about the lives of the 6 slaves that Washington had brought here, and every 6 months, before 6 months, he would change them, I knew the area where they likely would have ventured out and so on. And LORENE CARY. I asked LORENE CARY, along with Louis Messiah, I said, you know, and this was Richard Rosenthal's thinking, is that exhibits die. So we decided to do videography, and you could change them if you wanted to later. And essentially, the videography was stories of the 6 slaves. Of course, gosh, I'm forgetting their names too. And were acted out, and she did the script working with Louis Messiah. And so where the fireplaces were, we reconstructed the fireplace, and where there would have been on a wall a painting or something, there's this video screen. And behind it is the chimney. You know, the chimney, what you can visualize it as nothing. Those help to give some presence, because it had to be 24/7, so you couldn't build any walls. We got one wall. You couldn't build any walls. So I said, well, where the video screens are that tell the stories and so on, we'll make that a fireplace, so you can imagine it as that. And we'll make the sense of chimneys. You can imagine, right? Couldn't make them full height. So that was fantastic. And then when it was discovered that the bay window foundation was down there when it got dug up, because you had to do a phase 1 archaeology of that site, and that the connection between the main house and the kitchen was down below too. So it was decided at that time, the advisory, this is the hardest job I ever did, was not the architectural framework. That was easy. It was working with a group of 19 advisory members of the committee that had never worked together before. Each wanting something different, and trying to get consensus. The chief of staff of the mayor's office, mayor's chief of staff, was very helpful, both of them. And so what drove getting it completed was that there had to be some decisions by a certain time in order to get construction started. And so they finally agreed to the direction. Right. So, proud of all those things, yeah. Right, well, why are we still talking about affordable housing? The big projects that I talked about, like Grace Ferry development, there was federal money. There's efforts being made. I mean, there's small, much smaller. There's efforts being made to get developers that are building things in all these neighborhoods, and where they're building things that are mid-rise or high-rise. Initially started with incentives. Gee, you could build more if you provide affordable housing, some percentage of affordable housing here, you can build denser. First case that I was on the zoning reform committee, and so, or if you provide art or this, that, and the other, was an incentive that you could build more densely. I remember that first developer project just north on the river of the Benjamin Franklin Bridge had agreed to build, I don't know whether it was 10%, I forget how many units. I mean, out of 300 or plus units, 10% is 30, right? So, right. Agreed to do that, and he was allowed to build higher, more densely. He comes back when the building is front, not back to me. He comes back to the, I guess zoning, I don't know which agency in the city, and says, I may have had to come back to the Art Commission. Gee, we can't do this, blah, 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 blah. We'll give you back the money to replace what that would have cost. He didn't want to put any affordable housing in there. And like, thinking like, oh, are these people going to look different from your other people, you know? Right. Now, in New York, they enacted a law, and that is working. They enacted a law. You want to build in this neighborhood a zillion number of houses, there's got to be a certain percentage of affordable housing. Right. So, 40th Street here, 40th Market, the first generation, I remember when that was built, I think that's when it was the best low-income housing, any project is beautiful, and was done by Friday Architects at the time. Actually, I got some ideas for Tasker from that back then. Allied Construction was the owner. They had Section 8 funding, and their heart was in the right place. They built it. Hey, it's been successful for a zillion years. The new younger generation comes in, sees all that big development coming up Market Street, marching up there. Oh, we can make more money out of this. You know, we're close to the contract end term. We don't have to renew this, right? So that happened. That gets started. I sent a thank you email to Jake Blumberg, who in the Inquirer had Blumgard, not right, who has covered that and other sites. I mean, it's really the pressure from that. I mean, it's really public service that raised the attention, and particularly of the university and Drexel. Hey, they're the ones that are right. And the students, this generation of students feel socially conscious and believe in social justice, social equality for all. Believe in that. They come out and protest. Right. And councilperson Gaudier, she's a planner by trade. She did everything she could to try and get them to, and the law department says, legally you can't do this, you can't do that. So finally, she gets council to agree to this percentage for every new development in the law. And so I think I commended her for that, and still fighting on 40th Street. And so finally we see that there's some agreement on 40th Street, that there's enough land there to do some affordable housing and some commercial development. And they'll cover the cost of this, that, and the other, right? And that Penn and Drexel will contribute to something. I forget. Right, so, I mean, most developers, they don't want to be inhibited in, right? It's like this guy, Freeburg, OFC. Oh, God, I remember when Kenyatta was opposing developments that he wanted to do because it was kicking out low-income people that have been there for years. They're seniors. They don't have any way of making more money, right? And Freiberg, this is, you know, this is, they shouldn't be holding up, you know, land that belongs to the public. It should work by market standards, this, that, and the other. I said, here's a young, entitled guy, grew up entitled. I mean, I'm just reading it, you know, any roadblocks in anything. And I mean, the market doesn't have a conscience. And so, so then he decides to run for council against Kenyatta, right? You know, I drive through that area up to Washington Avenue. I'm surprised at how much that has been redeveloped. Gentrification has happened, but trying to protect some areas where people can still live there was important. Now, on Washington Avenue, south of there, a lot of vacant land. Is good to see that is being put into good housing use, right? Right. So I see what Gaudier was doing, what Kenyatta was attempting to do with some success, is that thinking about not just, of course, hey, when you're privileged enough to do better than others, those that are living on less income, you know, want to be good citizens, are good citizens, there should be something that makes things for them as well. I mean, when you did West Philadelphia streetcar suburbs, you realize, and I guess if George Thomas worked with you, is that Chestnut Street is about the edge. There are some buildings, apartment buildings up near 45th, 44th, but you got to draw the line somewhere where you can say, yes, because of historic this, that, and the other. Even though you know that the development on those streets may be something you don't like or whatever, but the zoning code, if it's not protected, the zoning code says, this is the zone. You got to have some flexibility. And hey, you know, you can't have everything your way. I mean, actually, there was hardly anything on Chestnut Street below 45th Street. There were some apartment buildings in the next couple of blocks on the south side. Gas stations, oh, there were a couple of apartment buildings of quality, the outside, I don't know what the units are like, down to, in Chestnut Street. Then there's that row between 40 row of houses on the south side, right? So I can't remember where that edge is in terms of the district, the National Register district. It's like here, 45th Street, between Woodland and Kingsessing. We all wanted those 3-story houses with porches and so on to stay. They weren't protected. So I guess it's University City Historic Society that got them to be brick fronts. Not protected. If it's not protected, you know, it's just different sides arguing. And then the university needed, you know, develop housing opportunities for students. I'm saying to myself, at least they got to be brick fronts. I mean, I like the porches. And so that's why, thankful to your efforts, that Chester Avenue, this block, are now on the record, on the register. I mean, I was saying, oh, why didn't they go over the Kingsessing? No, I guess because of the draw here is WILLIS HALE. Easy to do that. But I'm saying, God, what about Kingsessing? Yeah. I mean, the edge is, right? Everything can't be like it was. The universities are growing, and biomedical and all of these different expertise and so on. Philadelphia's trying to get more in the running, like Route 128 in Boston and Silicon Valley there, and there's some place in Chicago. Jobs for people, and young people are going to school for all these things, to stay here. So there are mixed results, right. Well, I'm glad to see that University City Historic Society is moving forward for Spruce Hill to get on the register. And hopefully Squirrel Hill. I mean, one time where we lived was called Spruce Hill, and then it was called Squirrel Hill, and then back to, you know, the different boundaries or whatever. And of course, and Cedar Park, that all of those get on the register, on the city register at least. Well, I shouldn't say anything about that. We may be involved at some level. Since I'm no longer an officer, I can't say what my personal things and speak. Well, I guess I can say personally. I'm not an officer personally. I think there are issues there. I mean, on one side, this is the same thing. The fashion district hasn't fully turned out because of the pandemic and so on, and so they're looking for other opportunities. I mean, there are all kinds of issues with the Sixers coming here, coming downtown, and, you know, of course there's the obvious Chinatown, another boundary for Chinatown to deal with. What I think is that Chinatown is the one that's most affected by this. And I'm told that in New York, the Barclays Center had similar kind of issues with neighborhoods, that they worked out a deal that, and this was Inger Safran's article that I read this about a year ago, is that the neighborhoods got affordable housing commitments. I mean, all these owners have billions of dollars and will make that. So if they can make out a reasonable deal with Chinatown, I think it could be made to work. But I think that's the major issue. I mean, and you wonder at the other end, why move? I know the argument is moving the center city because of transit and so on. But what happens down at Wells Fargo Center and Lincoln? All of it's a complex. And there's transit there. I think in the end all this is about money. You wonder why the owners want to leave that. Well, apparently they and Comcast are in conflict about rent and ownership of concessions. But I saw in the paper a couple of weeks ago that the new head of Comcast, STREETCAR, is saying, oh, the door is open to sharing the concessions, and we can talk about the rent and all that. So are they still? Anyway, when you reach a certain level, I mean, they're billionaires. What's their sense of public service? Do they have any? You know, it's what motivates them. It's, you know, what's right and what's wrong. When you're billionaires up there, it's a different interpretation for them. All right, and we just hope that there can be some reasonable settlement of that question. Yeah, yes, it's a good question. And working at the Navy Yard, we're working with Gensler, which has been promoted as one of the designers of the arena. Right, so, right. So I can't say, but so much. Other than as personally how I feel, not speaking for the office. Well, these are hard decisions. Would absence of Chinatown, would the injection of some stores and people coming in by transit, hey, be a real plus injection in where the fabric district, fashion district proposal didn't come through. Part of it didn't come through with real injection. And that was a major investment on the part of the city, the state, and those are moral questions, but they're also societal questions. What do you think about others and their living circumstances and their businesses and their environment? The world that I came into is different than the world there was before. And so they're coming in. One of the things I do see that's happening again, societal issues, not just investment in commercial development, but in different location. What needs to or should be done to sustain that environment or correct things that are problematic in that environment? And that in this generation, there's a lot more thinking about that and support of that effort, and that students are coming out of programs where those issues are emphasized, so they're much more socially conscious and socially conscious about the importance of public space, whether it's inside something or outside something, and taking care of things. I think this generation is more conscious of preservation in a broader sense than the previous, not just for aesthetics, which may have been more previous generation before mine and somewhat through mine, but one of the things I learned from PHMC, being on the board, is that preservation is not just aesthetic. It's parts of history, the human history, part A, B, and C, and cultural resources are important too. I mean, all these things that you see on finding your roots and so on, about ancestry and so on, the cultural resources are significant to consider preserving. Not everything. And in some ways, some buildings reflect some of those things. Some don't. I mean, it's like an interest in cemeteries now. Previous generations, even mine, was not interested in cemeteries. As a matter of fact, I remember at PHMC, I can't remember her name, who worked on that. Ramona Roscoe Benson, who was the last former head of the African American Museum in Philadelphia, were aligned with a group that said that Eden Cemetery ought to be renovated. There's a lot of important black people that are buried there. And there was a staff person, I can't remember her name, I know her well, that worked with her to do a study of preservation there. I mean, a lot of important, I'm not sure whether Marian Anderson is buried there. But there are a lot of important black Philadelphians that are buried there. Actually, my great aunt and my mother are buried there on top of one another. And, you know, in family history, that was emphasized, well, that's, you know, a place that's, you know, significant. And the funeral director was a black funeral director for both of those, had a connection with Eden. You know, early on, I didn't know about that, but through PHMC, I became aware that a lot of important black people were buried there. But in the early days, blacks could not be buried in cemeteries within the city. They weren't allowed to. It was segregation, and outlying cemeteries were developed for black burials.